Sometimes the younger sibling, rising from the mistakes made with the firstborn in the family, ends up becoming something greater. That mistake in this context is Vampire the Masquerade Redemption, a party-based RPG set in the world of darkness, which is much less talked about than Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines. That makes sense, considering that legendary Troika Games developed the second game. Activision trusted nihilistic software to make this first one. This was to be their first game as a studio, but the team had experienced employees who mostly worked at LucasArts before this venture. Coming out in 2000, the jank is what you would expect.
It is a world of darkness, hidden from the eyes of humanity by an elaborate masquerade.
If that isn't a 2000s intro to a game, I don't know what is. The game separates its events into two parts. First, 12th century Prague and Vienna, in a time before the Camarilla and Sabbat argued about how to deal with the human question. Then, 20th century London and New York. Seeing Christoph, this medieval Christian vampire, interacting with the modern world sure is a sight. Some characters are amused or weirded out by Christoph's old man mannerisms and words, and it's good that the developers didn't gloss over this. It stays for the rest of the game, whenever you meet someone new. If you only know this world by Bloodlines, you might find the Dark Ages section to be fascinating. While a lot of the politics at play in the modern setting are still here, everything seems a lot less secretive when it comes to how vampire society handles humanity. Seeing clans acting different from their modern counterparts, clans that eventually get exterminated or assimilated into other clans, and a world without the Camarilla and Sabbat conflict. It all adds up to expand into the existing lore in an interesting way. If you don't know anything about this world, you don't need to worry much. Christoph is new to it, just like you, so the game does attempt to explain the most basic concepts of Canaanite culture. With that said, they're not going to shoehorn an explanation of why vampires need blood or something. They assume you know the basics if you're interested in this kind of game. The game got high praise for its graphics when it came out, and some of the cutscenes definitely highlight the good use of lightning to improve the character models. The game uses lightning in general pretty well to create a gothic atmosphere, and whoever decorated the dungeons was definitely paying attention. It's rare to be running around and feel like some room's empty. Outside areas are a bit of a different beast. The terrain has a hard edge to it, but in urban areas it does get pretty, especially at night, and that's where most of the game takes place anyway. Since it's night for most of the time, it's a good thing they paid attention to the skybox. Sure, nowadays it's nothing mind-blowing, but games back in the day could look rough thanks to a bad skybox. Unfortunately, sometimes the areas are too open, and you can notice the low draw distance the game has. At the start there's only one area where that's really noticeable, but in later parts of the game it's distracting. In the 12th century section, there's a lot of Gothic architecture to gawk at. The streets are filled with very good looking stone buildings, massive stone walls surrounding towns and separating streets, and a few castles and manors. The lighting does wonders to highlight the care put by the designers to make it all feel mysterious. It's all very inspired by the Dark Project, both in style and scale. Despite the low draw distance everywhere, London in the 20th century works as a nice change of pace from all the medieval architecture you've been seeing until this point. It's kind of a mixture of Bloodborne with pathologic, old stone buildings together with blank-stared citizens walking around narrow streets. That's just like the London experience. New York is more utilitarian. Their buildings have less history, so the buildings look more geometric. The industrial look is stronger here, with the game taking place in docks and factory sites. With that said, they're still built in the details here. The music in this game is a big highlight. It always aimed to create a mood that never felt out of place. I was surprised by how well the music blended with other sounds in the environment. The past is filled with string instruments and horns, and that is great for whatever mood they introduce into an area. Modern day is different in the instruments and genre it uses for its atmosphere, but the goal is the same. The soundtrack's filled with techno songs and industrial metal fitting for the beginning of a new millennium. Instead of a church choir taking you into a righteous crusade, you get Blade Blood Rave. The voice acting is as good as it could be expected. While a few characters sound decent enough, I wouldn't be surprised if most of the talent came from around the office.
For all those that wander the highways alone after nightfall are seldom heard from again.
Beware the mines, Crusader. If mere men could kill the Hellspawn, we Knights of St. John would have slain them long ago.
Fools! He's only a fledgling! Kill him!
Christoph's VA can't decide if he's noble or bored most of the time. And the transition can be jarring since it happens from one dialogue box to the next sometimes. I guess bored sounding protagonists were a bit of a trend at the time. It may also be driver issues as I do game on Linux, but I heard a lot of pops from the dialogue and the soundtrack while playing. Audio quality for dialogue varied a ton, sometimes sounding crisp and sometimes sounding like it was recorded in the studio's bathroom. During gameplay, whenever you open your inventory, the main game screen slightly resizes to fit the rest of the screen. Considering the game doesn't have a pause option for combat, this does help to access consumable items during difficult combat encounters. The camera can be fully rotated around the character you have selected, but it's stuck to them, so don't think you can scout a dungeon ahead of time. You can either drag your mouse cursor on the screen to rotate, or use your numpad arrow keys. I honestly can't decide which one is better to use since they are both slow and awkward to use with the mouse movement, but I guess the numpad is the better option overall, once you get used to it. While the game is in third person, you can press the Z key to view the character's immediate surroundings. If you wanna look even slightly up, you need to do so in first person, as the third person camera simply won't allow that. The first person camera isn't necessary for any puzzles or anything, but it is nice to be able to take a closer look at your surroundings. You'll mostly move around the map with your mouse clicks. Want to open a door? Click on it. Want to hit an enemy? Click on him. Or it. It's all context sensitive, and most of the time you can't do more than one thing to whatever you're clicking anyway. So you can't murder Hobo an entire town for its loot. You can murder most nameless NPCs, sure, but there's no loot to gain, and it affects the ending you get. There are hotkeys to access the menus, but everything in the game can be done without the keyboard. This is fine when you only have one character to worry about, but it gets overwhelming really quick. As I touched before, you can't pause combat. Since the game works in real time, you can't micromanage your companions as much as I would like. That can be a problem, considering how both the AI for characters and enemies is extremely dumb. The game has 3 combat stances to choose from, and the only thing they change is whether the characters not selected will kill every enemy on sight, attack enemies that attack you, or run away from combat. When you're in town, do not have any character with the aggressive stance turned on. They will beeline their way to any human NPC wandering the streets and kill everyone they can before they die. Since you can kite enemies in dungeons sometimes to deal with them in smaller pockets, neutral stance is definitely the better option for almost all situations you find yourself in. Just don't expect to hit with most of your swings. This is one of those games where you can either kill an enemy with one hit or miss 10 times in a row. Pathfinding is not a strong suit for the game either, as both enemies and companions can sometimes get stuck on the terrain and decide to not participate in self-defense, or just flicker about while trying to get to a target. For anyone that isn't the character you're controlling, I recommend either a ranged weapon or some long-reach melee weapon. They will still have issues, but you're going to be less frustrated with a companion not contributing during a hard encounter. Another problem with your companions is the way they use powers. Disciplines are the spells in the World of Darkness, and they can change depending on a vampire's clan. Unfortunately, since combat works in real time, you would expect the AI to use disciplines in a smart way, or at least not be wasteful with it, since it costs precious blood to use. Most of the time, however, I found the AI using extremely costly abilities for no necessary reason, just wasting blood away. Once a character runs out of blood, it's easier for them to become frenzied during combat, where you can't control them anymore, and sometimes they just get stuck trying to suck blood from a skeleton's bones. I had to keep a decent supply of blood at all times just to keep my companions from getting frenzied during dungeons. It doesn't help that blood is also the means by which you are capable of healing your characters. Thankfully, there are plenty of blood vials in most dungeons, but it was still a constant stress since even those were barely enough. At least I can always appreciate a game that allows you to put living rats in your inventory. If the bars are too small for you to see, you can always pay attention to their 3D portrait on the bottom of the HUD. They tell if a character is low on health or under any status effects, and their death portraits are pretty horrible. I enjoy the gangrel companions' expressions the most. While Bloodlines feels a lot more open, Redemption puts you on a more linear journey through the World of Darkness. You start in a closed hub town with all the necessities you need, and get to explore dungeons filled with optional side rooms containing loot. The game contains a few choices that mostly affect your humanity rating, and lead to one of the 3 endings. But for the most part, the story is fixed in how it presents itself. Christoph is a man of action, so not fighting is rarely an option for him. Dungeons are either labyrinthian or a series of interconnected rooms that lead to a boss fight. So formulaic to the point of me getting tired of combat by the 3rd dungeon. The game will test your resolve to finish the story with an entire clown car of vampires hidden underground. As you may have noticed by some of the footage, the game's camera doesn't really work in cutscenes. At least not in 1080p. There's a widescreen mod fix that seems to work, by what people say, but I particularly didn't feel the need to use it. Even when the game came out, the camera work was never one of its strongest points. Anyway, there are worse bugs and frustrating glitches to deal with in this game, and somehow this is the best version yet. A couple of years back, the game got an update on Steam and GOG that tried to fix most of the issues it had with running on newer hardware. And while they couldn't fix inherent problems with the game like the AI, they did a decent enough job. You can now play it in Full HD, and the game supports most resolutions. Sometimes, whatever character I was controlling would be stuck on terrain. Most of the time I could escape, but one time it got so bad I needed to reload a save. It's a good idea to keep a healthy amount of save slots handy. You never know when something will break. When it comes to crashing, I only had one crash in 20 hours. This game doesn't get the love that Bloodline does, so it's no surprise that there isn't a lot of people trying to fix the game. Now, let's talk about the story. Christophe Romuald is a French crusader from the 12th century who got wounded in battle. As shown in this opening, that reminds me of Bram Stoker's Dracula. He recovers in a church, while being cared for by a nun named Aneska, whom he of course ends up getting a crush on. Once he takes care of a local Timidzi vampire who's causing trouble, He gets noticed by the local vampires, and is beaten before another clan attempts to take the warrior for themselves. You can't really blame them. Kristoff is a beast in combat, even as a human man. I'll get into spoilers for the story, so if you don't want that, you can go here. The story is definitely one of the major attractions. This will take a while. After his contribution to the vampire extermination cause, Kristoff gets ambushed while protecting the streets from Lacta and revenants. Though she looks pretty rough, Ekaterina the Wise is the leader of the Bruja clan in Prague. Brujas were philosopher kings who once lived among humans in the open, prizing knowledge and skill above all. But after the Camarilla, descended into becoming a clan of lowly rebels and troublemakers. Kristoff agrees to help Wilhelm, another Bruja member, to learn more about his new vampiric powers and recover texts from the Book of Nod, a collection of sacred texts pertaining to the history of Cain and his children, including stuff about the vampire end of the world. Realizing that he can't love Aneska anymore, Kristoff returns to Ekaterina's haven, the Bruja home base. There he learns about a war brewing between clans Tremere, Blood Magicians, and Timiti, the abominations you've been fighting before immortality. Humans, of course, would be caught in the middle of that, and so Ekaterina wants to put a stop to it. Being a good Christian, Kristoff agrees to help for now. Ekaterina asks that Kristoff and Wilhelm help the local Jewish community with their golem, which has been corrupted by a member of Clan Cappadocian you killed earlier. Once you kill the golem, you acquire its shen, the magical word that gives it life. Here's the first weird plot hole. Before the golem, Ekaterina specifically said that killing it would be a way to gain favor from the Jews in town in the upcoming conflict. But after the fight, Kristoff decides to take the sham to the leader of the Cappadocian clan, Garino. When talking to him, Kristoff talks like it was a decision made by Ekaterina prior to the fight, which is simply incorrect. Was this an oversight by the developers, where they changed their mind on how the story would go? Did they intend to allow the player to choose who to give the gem to? I have no idea, and that's not something we will get answers to. Get used to it. The game does this multiple times during its runtime. We get a new Cappadocian companion, Serena, who is supposed to be a magician. Unfortunately, the AI isn't made for magic, so I just gave her armor and a sword and hope for the best. The then true Prince Brando wants us to invade the Tremere Chantry, but first we need to acquire a saint's hand for him to give us permission. Vampire politics and all. We go through the Nosferatu tunnels to pass the holy ground it's surrounded by. It's by this point that I started to get tired of the dungeon formula this game takes. The Nosferatu are extremely prone to beheading, as I experienced, so their groups of 5 to 7 were more of a nuisance than a threat. How does Prague support so many vampires anyway? The city should already be dry with the number of vampires we've been fighting in our path. I can see why the Camarilla needed to step in and create the Masquerade, because there's no way humanity wouldn't know of the existence of vampires by the way they were operating prior to it. There's a simple door puzzle here, but the Cain lore you need to read for it is really intriguing. It gives you a nice perspective into the creation of vampires, how Cain saw his progeny as the original cursed, and the failures of his rebellion. These are the kinds of details that help this game to be so interesting and motivate me to get through this log. We acquire the hand and give it to the prince, who now gives us permission to assault the Tremere Chantry head-on. The Tremere are supposed to be blood mages, wizards, and warlocks who are feared and respected by many of the other clans. In this game, however, they are really squishy slavers. They aren't as weak as the Nosferatu we faced before, but their magic isn't anything special, for the most part. There are a few exceptions later. They also have a tendency to run away from combat, leading to constant misses from us until they get their courage back. Down on the 3rd floor, we find Eric, our final companion for this part of the game. He's a gangrel, so he works mostly as a damage dealer. All the companions do. We saved him from being made a gargoyle, so now he's in our debt. The leader of this chantry is a wizard named Ardon, and he tells us that Aneska was here, and then she went to the Divinity, where he hoped she would die instead of being made a vampire. She came back, however, so wishing to go to Vienna to search for Christoph's redemption, Ardon set it up for her to be sent with the next slave caravan. All this time talking, he was setting up some spell to defeat us, but I have no idea what he did. We return to Katarina, and defiant as ever, Christoph decides to go to Vienna to save Aneska. You can choose at any time to obey Katarina's orders and wait for reinforcements, and the game does try hard to lead you to that choice. In the end, it doesn't matter. We go to Vienna no matter what you choose, and nothing changes except your humanity rating and some dialogue with your companions. For some reason, Ekaterina sobs about how she'll lose 4 Prometheans in this venture, but Serana and Eric aren't Bruja. They're not really of concern to her. Going to Vienna is easy. Really, you just click a door and are teleported there. No cutscene, no nothing. The guards here are a lot more armored than in Prague. We find a local magician to sell us magical items, and at the nearby inn, we get an invitation to Count Orsi's manor. He's the guy dealing in the local slave market. Being a businessman, he doesn't help the group for free, asking that we deal with a local La Sombra, Luther Black, a suicidal vampire priest. While most of the game until now happened in closed spaces or narrow streets, the game attempts to open up in this section. And in this instance, we see how low the draw distance is. At least Morrowind was an open world with fog. This just feels sad. It makes sense with how much detail the game has for its time. But why try at all to show so much open space if it's not going to work? In the clock tower, we don't have many vampires around. It's mostly ghouls, which work as a nice blood refill whenever you're low. Unfortunately, this dungeon has a horrible gimmick in that it happens during the daytime. In some sections, daylight is visible, and whenever a character steps in the sun, they get damaged. This isn't a complete issue for the most part when you control a character, but your companions will run around and chase enemies directly into the blazing sun and die constantly. It's not even worth it to try and keep them alive. I decided to solo this section with Christoph and just revive my companions when we went underground. And I really needed them here. Look at how many enemies are in this one place. This is blobber level of enemies. By this point, combat isn't hard at all. It's just a long wait for waves of enemies to die so you can progress. We find Luther, and either way he dies with sunlight. Orsi finds us and trolls us in a dungeon to become slaves ourselves. This doesn't come as a surprise. His voice is comically evil, and Luther did call him Orsi the Betrayer when he heard who sent us. I hope you're not bored with dungeons yet, because we have another one back to back. This is very similar to the Nosferatu dungeon. The knights may seem intimidating with their full armor, but they are very prone to beheadings. Who the hell is giving blood to spiders to make them into ghouls? Also, rats? I get the Nosferatu having giant rats acting as guard dogs, but there are so many rat ghouls in this game, and they're not even a challenge at any point. They always died in one hit. Is it just to increase the number of enemies in every dungeon without caring? After so many one-shots on our part, we get to a Tremere Lord, the only variety of Tremere that are actually threatening. But more on that later. We flip a lever and escape. We found an amulet inside the last dungeon and brought it to Orvis, the local magician. His group, the House of Hermes, is the group that originated Clan Tremere, but they are still a human sect. though their magic is slowly waning. He tells us that it can help us enter the House the Hex, and asks for us to bring Itria's journal back. He's a 4th generation Tremere, which means he's child to Tremere himself. For this dungeon, we have to find 3 key pieces to open the door upstairs. The library and laboratory keys are simple enough, but this place is filled with Tremere lords. We faced one at the end of the last dungeon, but this time we may face 2 or 3 at once. If you get close to them and engage in melee, they're easy enough. Otherwise, their freezing spells last several seconds and we get destroyed by their lightning. The gargoyle key has a few Tremere protecting it, but no lords. Instead we get gargoyles, which sound more intimidating than they actually are. It's cool that you can differentiate the models in what vampire was used to create it. Gangbros have manes, and Nosferatu have pointed faces and severe baldness. This area has a vampire named Verstania protecting the key, and she appears to be creating these gargoyles we are fighting. Eric seems to know her, and that makes sense as when we met him he was about to be transformed himself. With all the keys, we open the barrier upstairs. The journal we came to get is right there on the table, and once we grab it, we are stopped by Itrias. He tries to let us go in peace, but Kristoff really wants to know about Aneska. Eric gets confrontational, and Itrias completes his transformation into a gargoyle. I didn't think the game would kill off a companion like that. That was a nice surprise. He isn't stronger than any other gargoyle we fought. Itrias is defeated. He tells us about how the Divinity attacked the caravan Aneska was on, and just pops out of existence. The group heads back to Prague, and Arvus doesn't get the journal he asked for. Prague is in chaos now. A witch hunt begins, the royal family is murdered for being Divinity ghouls, and all kindred are in danger. Against Ekaterina's command, again, Kristoff and the surviving group infiltrate Vizarad Castle in an attempt to save Aneska. The Divinity look scarier than most other clans, but they are as underwhelming as could be for the enemy that was hyped up until now.
Kill him! Kristoff, the murderer of Afra! Kristoff, the butcher of countless primacils!
Kristoff, ravager of impenetrable Tremere fortress! We should flee!
Kristoff certainly has gained a reputation since his embrace. For the first time, we start getting lordom, with a few notes scattered around the castle. We had the odd letter or book explaining something before, but only for the next 2 dungeons it's going to become more common to see lore in writing. Vukadlak, the big baddie Divinity, came to Prague a long time ago, carried by his servants after being put to sleep by his fellow clansmen for being too power-hungry. Labusa, the commander of his forces, is upset by the attention that her master is giving to his newest ghoul. After defeating a rancor, we discover that his newest ghoul is Aneska. Kristoff tries to reason with her, but as the castle is being destroyed by the angry masses, a column falls on both of them.
Good work, brother. I'll alert Father Aloysius that it's around. Then we get over it.
Kristoff, arise. Thou art in grave danger.
It has been 800 years. Kristoff wakes up in a warehouse, confused and hungry. His body was recovered by the Society of Leopold, a group of religious hunters that fight against the supernatural. You've played Bloodlines, you know who they are. Kristoff doesn't need spells anymore. He has a Glock. Most of our equipment from the past is gone, save any rare items in Kristoff's inventory at the time. Same with our gold. As we are out of the medieval Dark Ages, we welcome the Techno Revolution. The UI for leveling up got a makeover, with more colors added. It's a subtle change, but it makes a difference for the tone they're going for. Don't be fooled by the fluorescent lights. This is still a dungeon. The enemies here use stakes that can paralyze Kristoff, stun guns, actual guns, and flamethrowers. The scientists can also use prayers and throw holy water to deal heavy damage. All enemies die with 1 or 2 hits, but they're definitely packing more of a punch now. Though I'll say that is mostly because you don't have a lot of equipment on. On the way you'll find some new weapons like aluminum bats and lead pipes, but if you have a rare weapon from the last part, it'll definitely still do the job better. The lore on this place talks about how the rebellion supposedly happened while we were trying to save Anaska, and how that started a wave that would become the First Inquisition. The leader of this society chapter supervised an excavation in Viscerad Castle, knowing it used to be a Divinity hideout, and was hoping to find Vukodlak himself in there. With no resistance, they opened the way, unknowingly destroying the holy protection put on the place, and got attacked. With heavy losses and not finding Vukodlak, they started transporting artifacts to their base in London, including Kristoff's body. Their leader is Father Leopold. Although he's not the creator or leader of this entire group, the name can be confusing. His boss fight can be done by killing him in combat, or by destroying the blood tanks he uses to remain alive. By drinking vampire's blood, he has been able to live for more than 200 years, while remaining human. A letter on his desk shows that he was planning on drinking Vukodlak's blood to defeat all of vampires, keeping some as blood reserves for his immortality, and then conquer the entire world.
Is all my reason thrown down? Surely my sleep hath made me mad, for if I'm yet sane, then the world has become a lunatic asylum. Towers of glass loom over the tallest cathedral spires. Juggernauts of steel hurtle through the streets of London. The cobbled Roman roads, which once I walked as a young crusader, are now fused into a single ribbon of black stone. And those roads are clogged with night-walking Londoners, heedless of the danger from the vampires among them. Are they so emboldened by the phantom torches, which pierce the night and stab my eyes? Surely my world has died, and all I love lies buried with it.
Welcome to London. You can pretend that the low draw distance is fog. True to real life, as soon as Kristoff steps foot onto the streets, someone attempts to mug him with a knife. Kristoff intimidates the man, and is able to get out of his crusader rags into something more modern. Blue jeans and a jacket. The ponytail stays no matter what. Walking into Club Tenebrae is where we find Pink, our first companion in this modern world. He's a Bruja like Kristoff, except he's a newer kind of Bruja. Remember what I said about them changing after the Camarilla? There's a contrast between the personalities of our companion Wilhelm back in the day, who was an honorable and loyal warrior, and this new, more violent vampire. We get another Bruja as a companion in both parts of the game, and they both show us to a new alien world. He shows us around a few shops and takes us to a brothel, where a clan of vampires run a slavery scheme for the Sabbat. These vampires are followers of Set, or the Ministry of Set, or just Setites. Their clan is descended from the Egyptian god Set, or Sutek. Inside their brothel is Lily, a toreador who is enslaved to their leader Lucretia. He tells us about the followers' dealings with the Sabbat and the Prague shipments, and offers her help in exchange for her freedom. They have the disease where their heads get cut whenever they enter combat with us. In team, they can summon vipers and are able to mesmerize our group constantly. It's more annoying than a threat. Their temple is filled with fire traps. Lucretia is curious about Kristoff, but we can't avoid a fight here. After defeat, she turns into a bunch of snakes and slithers away. It turns out her heart is separated from her body, and we need to destroy it, in order to kill her. It's stored in the Tower of London. Place filled with ghoul spiders and wraiths. The spiders are fine, they may poison your characters once in a full moon, but the wraiths hit very hard, and it's easy to miss them. Dealing with more than 2 at once is a problem. It doesn't help that from this point forward, Pink's AI broke, and he stopped moving. He just stopped moving for the rest of the game, and nothing I did fixed it. We get a heart, and back in the temple, we are taken to the boss chamber right away. She animorphs into a snake. After battle, Christoph gets a chance to diablorize. Diablorize? Lucretia's heart here. Diablery is a consumption of a kindred's vitae through their heart, consuming what is considered their soul. It's a very taboo act in canine society, and most of the oldest and more powerful vampires have done it at least once, as it gives immense power and can even lower one's generation. I couldn't see Christoph doing such a thing, as sucking someone's soul. Lily is free and she offers her help to save Aneska. Lucretia said that a cargo ship named Saint Madeleine is the one taking the crates from Prague, and a warehouse from Clan Giovanni could be holding it. A dying agent inside says to meet someone named Thorn in New York and to tell him about the contraband in Giovanni's. That's where we're going next. You can tell this is New York because now we get hip-hop music. Thorn is thankful for the information we passed and tells us to go back to Europe, even though he does nothing to stop us going the other way from the ship. It's New York, alright. We meet Samuel, a Nosferatu being ambushed by some others from his clan. They're Sabbat and are trying to convert him. That's another lifetime bond for Christoph. Samuel believes that a friend of his can help Christoph get into the Giovanni warehouse, but he's Malkavian. They're mad, but also prophetic on occasion. His name is Devno, and he only asks that we intercept police communications through the sewers to be able to get the password for the warehouse. I thought people would be upset with a Nosferatu walking around in public, but no one seems to care. To no surprise, the sewers have Nosferatu in them. They are just as weak as back in the day, but now they're dressed like stoners. At the end of the dungeon, there are ghoul alligators to deal with. Finally, someone is ghoulifying useful animals. That someone is the Underprince, a Nosferatu that controls this part of the sewers. Even with the sewer gators, he decides to employ rats for his boss fight. With the scanner activated and the police comms intercepted, we return to Devno, who gives the password true to his word. In true Malkavian fashion, he foreshadows future events of the game. The Giovanni have the head-losing condition as well. It seems that every kindred in the modern era does. They do summon those difficult wraiths from the tower, and can use an AoE to devastating effect. So they're not easy. Christoph the Old Man learns about Smack. Alessandro Giovanni commands this operation, and his lack of fighting spirit is appreciated. Once threatened, he spills that he sends all shipments to Orsi, the same Count Orsi who betrayed the group when trying to enslave it in the Dark Ages. Pink jumps him and kills him all of a sudden. Wilhelm is alive, and he comes to break Pink's subterfuge. Turns out that he isn't Bruja, but a member of the Banu Hakim. He was hired to prevent Christoph from finding Vukodlak, but he was never told that he needed to murder outright, so he just took him on a wild chase to kill his enemies. If that's the case, why would he lead Christoph to a bunch of people who knew about Vukodlak and his dealings? He could have sent Christoph anywhere else. The man knew nothing about the modern world. Anyway, Wilhelm is back to the group, even though he's Sabbat. This is his chance to recover his humanity. It's convenient that Pink was the one with the broken AI as well, So now I have 4 characters again. At Orsi's penthouse, he isn't there. He sold the place 2 days before. Piece of paper on the floor reminds Lily of her sire's art, which she creates with her own blood. She has been missing for the last 3 years according to her. We find her slave master in a small room where she is being forced to create art for Orsi. He really has not changed. This portrait will allow us to enter the factory where Orsi is, so we take it, promising to kill the man. This place has Ventru, which turn into wolves and die easily, and some Divinity, who decided to enter the new age completely nude. Going up the factory floors is easy, and Orsi himself is even easier. Christoph throws Orsi into a hot cauldron through a window, and that's him done. The 3 women from before are here, and the talking one tells the group where to find Vukodlak. He's under a church, a few meters from the factory. With the ring of midnight, Vukodlak awakes. This is the final dungeon, the Cathedral of Flesh. I can't tell you how glad I am for that. This place is, as expected, filled with Divinity. They tried shaking things up by putting in the Rancor boss enemy multiple times, but they were not scary even then. After a while, we find Vukodlak's servant Lebusa, but she seems to be out of it. In the final chamber, we finally face Vukodlak. He's taller than I thought he would be. As far as final bosses go, this is good design. We deal with him the American way. If we had low or median humanity, this is where we would have one of the bad endings. With humanity under 25, Christoph diablorizes Vukodlak and kills Aneska, with a desire to take over the world. Between 25 and 50 humanity, you can actually choose which of the 3 endings to get. The other bad one leads to Christoph being ghoulified by Vukodlak and made to kill Aneska, now an eternal servant of evil. Since I had well over 50, Vukodlak throws the group into the cathedral bowels. Here is the wall of memories, containing Aneska's thoughts over the last hundreds of years. They are recorded in these weird worm creatures with Aneska's face, and they make a disturbingly wet noise. These are gruesome and awesome. They show that Aneska fought to keep her purity, but seeing no way to succeed, he gave in to Vukodlak's desires, hoping to delay his return. And she succeeded. He manipulated a 1000-year vampire into killing his faithful servants and keeping useless people like Orsi around. From before this point, you could have thought that she was fully under his control. Lebusa helps the group escape, and now Vukodlak can be faced a second time. This time, Vukodlak activates his Chiropteran Marauder form, giving him bat wings and a ton of health. As he is defeated, nothing happens. The screen fades to black, and we get a scene where Christoph and Aneska are reunited. Now that her master is gone, she will die, so Christoph bites her, making her into a vampire. Supposedly, they're together forever now. And that's the game's story in its entirety. I tried being thorough so that, if you don't care about playing this broken game, you can at least appreciate the story and design. From what I've read online, multiplayer seemed to work like a D&D scenario player and creator for the World of Darkness. You had one player serving as the storyteller, who guided other players through an interface, which allowed the placement of enemies and items and the modification of player character statistics. This was heavily talked about prior to the game's release, but it didn't come out smoothly, and so the game suffered in its reviews. The game came with a few pre-made scenarios that apparently felt too stiff for the editor's potential, and that doesn't surprise me considering the rest of the game. Besides that, playing with strangers was a risk, since they could kill you for your money and items. It's a good thing to know gamers haven't changed much. I can't say that I would recommend this game to everyone. This is for people who are really into World of Darkness and are willing to push through whatever slog they need to get more of it. And there's plenty of slog for this series. The monotonous gameplay doesn't get better over time. If you want a gothic hack and slash, go play Diablo or The Incredible Adventures of Van Helsing series. If you want a vampire RPG, just replay Bloodlines. I'll be going for something more therapeutic for me next time. Thank you for watching until this point. I'll be doing reviews from now on. I just enjoy it more than gaming challenges. Also, it's an excuse for me to talk about things I like or find interesting.